You are listening to UpTalk with Sean Conahan. The gloves are off, and it's time to have a chat.
Hello, people, and welcome to the podcast, the final episode of Season 3. That sounds pretty crazy, but it is. Thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you as always. We are brought to you by Project Trauma Support. Please check them out at projecttraumasupport.com. Fantastic program that I was a part of, blessed to be a part of, founded by Dr. Manuela Joanno. Please check them out, all the work that they're doing. If you're looking for a place to park some charitable donation money this holiday season, please consider Project Trauma Support, okay, and help them with the very important work that they're doing. Thank you to Project Trauma Support for supporting the podcast and being our title sponsor for the end of the season. Okay, how are you guys doing? It's December. It's a tough time of year for a lot of people. So I hope you're doing okay. If you are not doing okay, please reach out, say something, do something, so that people, will take notice that you may be having an issue and that you may need some help, because there's lots of help out there. Tons of help out there. I've had 24 guests on this season. Okay, so it just goes to the fact that you are not alone. We are not alone. Never have been alone, really. But sometimes it seems like that. So reach out, please. What else do I want to talk about? It's my show. I should talk about whatever I want, I suppose. You know what? I'm going to talk about this. I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do this because it just bugged me so much. So we got this whole "Baby, It's Cold Outside" song issue, which is simply ridiculous. And here's all I'm going to say. Okay? I want you all to know this. You have a right to participate in or to spend your money at, take part in whatever it is you want, things that don't offend you. Okay? And if something does offend you, you have the right to not do that thing or not spend your money there or not hang out with that person. You have that right. Okay? And that's what I would say. If you don't like a movie, don't watch it. If you don't like a song, don't listen to it. If you don't like a person, then don't hang out with them. If you don't like a business or organization, don't spend your money there. Okay, it goes on and on and on. You have that right, individually. And this scenario is true in 99% of the time. There is that 1% occurrence that, an issue dictates that we all do need to come together and make a point. But most of the time, and the song issue is included in that, it's not necessary. Okay? You have the right to not partake in things that offend you. You can do that. You don't have the right that because you are offended, that you're now going to take away that choice or that option for everybody else. Okay? That's not how it works. That's not being conscientious. That's being a dick. Okay? But however, it's very easy to fall into that pattern and to join in with everybody else and to, this whole I'm offended era. Which, like I said, sometimes, a really small percentage of the time, it's warranted that we need to group together and do something as a whole. But most of the time, it's just an individual choice thing. If you don't like it, don't do it. If it offends you, don't do it. You have that right. And I totally support you in that right. Okay, so let's not get on these bandwagons. Let's jump off this train that just is offended by everything, and that means everything should be banned. Because it just isn't true. Okay? That's my opinion. You may have a different one. If you do, I want to hear about it. Let me know. Write me a comment, write me a message. And I would love to hear about it. My position on things is only my position until somebody changes my mind. I'm always open to that. So, give it a go. I don't think you're going to do it in this case. I don't think you're going to win. Not that it's a winning and losing thing, but I don't think my mind will be changed on this, but you never know. So I'm open to it. All right, guys, that's my little end of the season rant for you. That's about all I have. My guest this episode is Dr. Megan McElheran. She's a clinical psychologist, has her own private practice, also does a lot of work with wounded warriors. We're going to talk about the programs that she's involved with, life-changing programs. Some of them you may have heard about, and some of them not. I get her on a rant. She joins me, goes down a little rabbit hole, and we talk about some PTSD-related issues that bother me. And it's just my opinion again, but we talk about it. So I hope you enjoy it. I really loved it. This lady was crazy good on the podcast, ridiculously smart. So glad that we have her in our corner. That's enough from me. Let's get to it.
It was a dark and stormy night, nor'easter rolling in.
Welcome to the podcast, Megan. I am so excited to have you on today.
Thanks, Sean. I'm really excited to be here with you.
Cool. It's really special for me. I try to do this a few times a season to have a clinical expert come on just to talk about some clinical issues and to educate. I need that myself, so I can imagine that our listeners would appreciate that as well. So it truly is an honor to have you on.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Well, I so appreciate that you do this, and like the contribution you make to just keeping the conversation going is tremendous. So thanks back to you as well.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Got to keep this chat going. So, Megan, I'm just sort of getting to know you, and our listeners may or may not know you. So
yeah. Just
tell us a little bit about you, where you grew up, how you grew up, and what led you to want to be a clinical psychologist.
Sure. So I was born in Ottawa, but I grew up in Calgary, which is where I am presently living. I grew up in a family with two parents who are mental health people. So I was sort of steeped in it throughout my childhood and adolescence. And I have a couple of older brothers who, as we all got into going to university, they went on to different paths. And frankly, I wasn't the greatest student through high school and early university, and I was kind of floating around a little bit. And then at the time when I graduated high school, the University of Calgary had this great 65 and you're in program because they needed students. So I got in and sort of spent a couple of years just floating around, but then started taking psychology courses, and lo and behold, they kind of struck the right note with me. So I sort of decided, in my early 20s, I think this is kind of what I'll do, at least for a bachelor's degree. And then I finished my bachelor's degree and was living in Calgary, and I may have even been living with my parents at the time, I'm not sure, but I sort of thought to myself, I need to kind of get some exposure to this work if I think I'm going to want to do this as a career. And so I had various kind of starts and stops with that, but I ultimately ended up working in a program for teenage girls who were involved in the sex trade in some way. Right. And they were trying to get off the streets and kind of get their lives back together. And it was just a really sort of profound experience in my life to be with these young women who were really, they'd gone through tons of trauma, but they were really focused on kind of reclaiming their lives. And I just found that, so captivating. So it sort of told me at that point in time that I really was interested in the work, and I was going to need to do some more things if I wanted to actually kind of practice in the field of psychology. Right. At the time, and unfortunately this is still the way, it's quite difficult and competitive to get into programs in Canada. But I was successful in getting into a program in California. So I went and moved to East Palo Alto, California is where I lived, and I was at a program that was a partnership with Stanford University. And in like the 5-6 years I spent in California, I was able to spend like a lot of my time working in the United States Veterans Affairs system. Right. And that was with men and women who had been through combat, so lots of Vietnam vets, but also Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, but lots of people who also had experienced military sexual trauma. So, right. Just working with people who had experienced a lot of trauma. And so I was really able to kind of, learn from some really skilled clinicians and be involved in a lot of research and things like that. And then I came back here, towards the end of the 2000s and started working for the Operational Stress Injury Clinic here in Calgary, and really sort of got, schooled in the next couple of years after that in the, experience of the Canadian veteran, because we had a lot of Afghanistan veterans at that point in time coming through the clinic, but also our CMP members and the experiences of our veteran population in Canada as well. So a lot of the Bosnia era folks and so on. And then in, 2011, I guess, I for various reasons, felt like I wanted to sort of spread my wings a little bit, so decided to go into independent practice in the community here in Calgary, which actually allowed me this great opportunity to start working with other uniformed service folks. So pretty quickly started working with firefighters and paramedics and Metro Police and corrections officers, and that's kind of been what I've been doing for the last 5-6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
that's a long bio.
No, it's great. It's awesome. We need people like you. So I'm glad you're here. So then at what point, because I know you do a lot of work with Wounded Warriors, and we're going to get into that. So
Yeah.
at what point did you start to get involved with Wounded Warriors and the whole, first responder mental health community?
Sure. So, I would say that getting involved with the first responder community, that happened pretty quickly after I left.
You were already doing stuff with veterans.
Yeah. So I was sort of already working a little bit in that space. And then I think it was in about 2014 or 15, something like that. I ended up on an interview with retired Lieutenant Colonel Chris Linford, who you may know or have talked to. Okay. And Chris and his wife Catherine were in the process of developing a couples program called Couples Overcoming PTSD Every Day.
Right.
Yes, because Chris had been diagnosed with PTSD, and they really came to appreciate that his injury was very much a family issue, and particularly had impacted him and his wife Catherine. So they were working with a psychologist out of Victoria, Dr. Timothy Black, to develop a group-based residential program for couples, where the couples would come for 5.5 days and really have this kind of intensive treatment experience together, where they sort of work together on repairing their relationship that had been impacted by the PTSD injury. So Chris and I, had a lengthy conversation sort of in the early stages of them developing this. And, I had in the States, like the majority of the work I did, in the VA system was group-based, work with, obviously military, but all group-based intervention for PTSD. So I was quite schooled in group, and I really liked the power of the group to be able to help people sort of heal in their recovery. So Chris telling me about this just hit the right notes for me. So I had the opportunity to go on, I think it was the first or second COPE program that they delivered out in Victoria, and was totally hooked. So since then have stayed as a facilitator of the COPE program. So I do, 1 to 2 of those per year. And then Wounded Warriors has also in the last year and a half developed a group-based trauma program called the Trauma Resiliency Program. Right. And so I've gotten involved in facilitating that as well. So that's kind of my history with Wounded Warriors. And I just, I really appreciate sort of what they're trying to do in this space, as well as,
awesome.
Yeah, and they're bringing the first responders into this conversation as well, where historically they've been really focused, solely on military and veterans. Now we've got first responders and their families in the mix, which, again, I think just makes a lot of sense when we, especially when we're talking about operational stress.
It does. This is my personal opinion. I see the military as sort of the tip of the spear, or the top of the pyramid when it comes to first responders that may be affected by PTSD and mental illness. I think I see them as the top, only because of the responsibility that they carry, just the deep responsibility to protect the country, and that they need to be ready to take a life at any point in time.
Yeah.
I think that that's something different. I see that as sort of a little bit of a gap, like them, and then, then obviously police officers have that as well. And then it's sort of, we're all in this family together, but I do see a certain, I don't want to say hierarchy, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do know what you mean. And, I don't totally disagree, right? Like, I do think there are, and like, I think actually, frankly, with any service group, we'd be remiss to say that they're all the same. Like,
right.
I think that when we look at physiological response to stress and we look at, post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that, like, we see a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of unique variables from, the military populations to, police to fire to paramedics, right? Completely. So, but, and frankly, I'm sort of at the stage of my career where I still see some active duty military. I certainly see lots of veterans, of different conflicts, but I frankly don't worry about them as much in the sense that there are, there are operational stress injury clinics across the country. Like R2MR emerged out of the military, like things like this, like they've been working at this for, quite a number of years.
They're ahead of the game a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. And I feel like the first responder populations, like, for me right now, and I would suspect for a long time, that's really where I'm focusing a lot of my sort of energy and attention, just because we need to understand the experience of the Canadian first responder, better and differently so that we can develop different programs and we can intervene better and we can just understand that, again, differently in Canada, because right now we just continue to have to draw from American populations and it's not always 100% overlap, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if I know like some of our programs, like Project Trauma Support that we have here, has been modeled after programs in the States such as Save a Warrior, which is out of California. But you're right. I mean, we are a little bit unique, even though we have similar experiences, obviously, no matter what country we're doing this in. But we are a little bit unique, and there is a little bit of a culture difference that you may see when you're trying to develop a program. You know what I mean? Yeah. For sure. So the COPE course, that couples program, and the trauma resiliency program, are they programs that are still offered now?
They are, yeah. So, they're still ongoing, and Wounded Warriors has just continued to make a tremendous commitment in terms of funding those programs for the folks who apply. Chris and Catherine and Tim, as well as Alex Sterling, who's also the co-developer of the trauma resiliency program, like, they're pounding the pavement, continuing to try to find other funding dollars, and they're continually working on building up the clinical capacity so that we have, other clinicians to keep delivering these programs. So yeah, and the data that's being gathered is telling us that these programs seem to be having an impact. So yeah, we've got those programs still available and available for veterans, military members, and first responders. So it's kind of crossing all the borders there.
Wicked. Okay, perfect. So now I want to move on to BOSS.
Yes.
I hear about this BOSS program all the time from people. So
we'll be the boss of your mental health, Sean. That's the idea.
Absolutely. So tell me about it. What is it?
Well, so here's I don't know, I have a lot of sort of my own personal philosophies that I bring into my work, right? And I really believe in the idea of, as we know better, let's do better, right? And since I started an independent practice in Calgary in 2011, frankly, I've been overrun by work. So, right. I brought on associates and things like that, but I've really puzzled on this problem, frankly, in the last 5-6 years of going, like, the people who are in need of the kind of sort of trauma focused support I can provide, the need is just not going down. And while we have way more understanding of PTSD and how to treat it, it seems to me to be a bit of a flaw in the system if all we're ever doing is sort of mopping up the mess, for lack of a better way of putting that, right?
Yeah.
So in the last few years, I've just really kind of been puzzling on how do we try to do a better job or a different job of trying to help people protect their mental health as they do this very important work that's never going to go away, and we're always going to need people to do it, right? I don't believe that people's mental health should be the cost of them doing their jobs well, right? Like, right. Frankly, it should be the opposite. So that's kind of some of the underpinnings of just what I've been sort of marinating on in my own mind for the last while. Mm-hmm. And then in the last while as well, the number of times I've shared something in a clinical session with a client, whatever service organization, where that person has said to me, man, I wish I knew this before I started working.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
right. So anyways, I have found that intriguing. I've seen this as a problem that needs a different kind of solution, right? This idea of sort of resiliency or proactive mental health. I've seen that as a problem that needs some ideas to solve.
Right.
So I started a couple of years ago just doing my own exploration into, like, what do we mean by resiliency? What are we talking about? And really came to understand through looking at like all sorts of empirical literature as well as just anecdotal evidence and whatever else. When we're talking about resiliency, we have no agreement on what that actually means, but people seem to report having a better sense of resiliency when they have sort of enhanced self-awareness and when they have good relationships. Those two things seem to be the key pieces in helping people to be resilient to whatever, whether that's operational stress, whether that's the experience of going through, cancer and cancer treatment, whether that's the loss of a child, like whatever it might be, those two things.
Just resilient in life.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I started just kind of putting that down on paper and really thinking to myself, okay, what do I actually think, could help here? And so, along came BOSS, which basically, I've developed so that we've got 8 modules of education or information, which right now, and I fully anticipate that this will change as we get more research, but right now reflects, the best of what I think we know about, helping people to protect their mental health. So there's education around that. So we talk about sort of stoic service culture and how that has impacted particularly suppression of emotion. We talk about the neurological underpinnings of operational stress and what happens if operational stress goes unchecked and the actual trauma that we see occurring in the brain. We talk about, Stephen Porges's work in polyvagal theory, looking at when your body is overwhelmed by stress, there's going to be some things that happen that are outside of voluntary control. And we look at thoughts and feelings and sort of avoidance and how to combat that. We look at communication. And finally, we talk about sort of empathy as this kind of gift and burden of doing emergency response work like you folks do. So that's kind of the education. I'm boiling that down into sort of the topic areas. But my feeling on this is that if information was what people needed, we wouldn't have this problem still, right? So again, if I think about those 2 key pieces of resiliency that I've kind of been taking a look at, the other piece is relationships. And if I draw on the work I've done in the US prior to coming back to Canada, what I've seen happen in COPE programs and TRP programs, the group, bringing a group of people together to have these conversations and build different relationships together, like that seems to be a key ingredient. So in BOSS, we're bringing together 10 first responders at a time in a group format where we've got mental health facilitators who are facilitating discussion. We're reviewing these topic areas and people are getting sort of homework, for lack of a better word. They are being invited to practice new skills and ideas. But they're coming together as a group to really be a group that's working on this problem together. So we do that basically for 8 weeks in a row, 2 hours at a time. And then there's 10 months of follow-up. So that group stays together for 10 months and they come back together on a monthly basis to check in with one another. How are you doing? How is this going? Sort of problem solve issues that are coming up, perhaps triage people to other levels of intervention if they need it. But basically give them a year's worth of dose, if you will. And our working theory here is that there's going to be something about being part of this group. And this, it's a different kind of group than a working group, right? It's a group where we're encouraging people to be, self-disclosing and actually getting real with one another.
Right. So how long does how long are you in the program for?
Well, so a person starting the first day of BOSS would come for 8 2-hour sessions, so 8 weeks in a row. And then they would be coming back on a monthly basis for a 2-hour group session per month for the next 10 months. So it's a year's worth. The first 8 weeks, the first 2 months are the sort of most intensive part. Right. And then there's follow-up.
Okay. So right now,
yeah.
So if I was to let's say it was me taking this. So yeah. I would have to go to these appointments physically, right?
You would. I mean, I think a piece I'll just add in is that so there's this organization out of the University of Regina called the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment, CIPSRT for short.
Right.
I'm not sure if you've heard of them. You probably have.
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah, anyways, they're sort of devoted to kind of studying the experience of the first responder in Canada. And they've come on board to actually study BOSS for the next while. So we're actually gathering some data and one of the things that we'll look at is could we do BOSS deliveries remotely, right? So yeah. Right now people need to be there in person, but being able to deliver remotely will absolutely include that as an option.
Yeah, I think you'll get there. I mean, telehealth has a pretty good foundation, and so I know that you have to. Obviously, you're in the beginnings of this. I don't have any doubt in my mind that that you'll get to that point where we'll be able to do that remotely, so that anybody anywhere,
Yeah.
as long as they have an internet connection,
they could do it, right?
they'll be able to
And
do
so,
it. Perfect.
yeah, and I mean, the reception so far has been great, right? Like we've now run 4 programs, and the feedback we've had is that, people are appreciating the information because it's, it's up to date and it's empirical and it's science based and all that stuff, but they're really responding well to the group, right? Which is really funny because a lot of people struggle with the group idea.
Right.
But it's, there's something that can happen in a group when some care and attention is put towards forming a group well. So we actually set some terms of engagement of what it actually means to operate well around, how we treat confidentiality and things like that. So when a group forms well, more often than not, in my experience, people find it really, really relieving because they can sort of finally have this, we all have this fundamental need to just be seen and heard and understood. And if we can do this well, people start to experience that. And they're talking about operational stress, right? They're talking about things that historically they haven't really been encouraged to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So you have these initial appointments.
Yeah.
And then where do we go from there?
So initial appointments for 8, if we're calling a standard protocol, 8 weeks in a row. So you'd come every week to, wherever, and this is a national program. So, whether right now we've got a program in Calgary, we've got another one starting in, Toronto in a couple of weeks. Anyways, so wherever you happen to be, you turn up to whatever the location would be for those, 8 2-hour sessions. And then, TBD in terms of the timing and location of the follow-up sessions, but the follow-up is part of the BOSS program. Because, what we know, and you know this, I know this, if we don't have support to learn, then we won't learn, right? If I don't start to practice something, I'm I'm unlikely to kind of incorporate it into my routine. So we're hoping that we can give some people some follow-up and some continued support. So they almost form their own sort of micro community, as they're participating in BOSS, which, hopefully we're hoping is going to enhance their sense of being resilient to what they're experiencing in their job.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm listening to this, I think this is what students should be taking during their courses.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, honestly, Sean, that's exactly where this came from for me. I would love to see this at basic training, depot training. You know what I mean? That's exactly where I would wish for that. But, it's kind of we got to start where we are.
Oh, for sure. I think
right?
We'll get there. Because that's why, once you have that telehealth sort of module in there where they could take it while they're at paramedic school, or like you said, at depot, or
yeah.
And then if you get people on board, organizations on board to actually make it as part of their curriculum, which I don't think would be very hard to do with a lot of them. I mean, maybe some big organizations like the RCMP, there may be some hurdles, but I think this is, that's where I see it. This is just would be fundamental for a student to learn.
Well, yeah, and right now, so one of the questions I often get is what are the exclusion criteria? If I'm already having PTSD symptoms, can I come or not?
Right.
And my answer to that is if somebody's got active PTSD symptoms, they should be going to a different program, whether that's the group-based program of trauma resiliency or whether that's individual psychotherapy, that probably needs to happen first. But we've got people in our groups already who have been diagnosed with PTSD, have gone through that treatment, and now they're coming to the BOSS program, and they're still sort of finding it helpful because before operational stress is what BOSS stands for, sorry. Okay. And when I was thinking about this, it's kind of yes, in the ideal vision, it would be before you're into your careers. But I almost think of this too as just before you start your shift, before you put your uniform on, these are the things that we want you to be mindful of, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And you tell me, because you've got your own story with this, but my thinking on this, and this is through, mostly my clinical experience, is when people are suffering operational stress effects and they're starting to feel like they're getting dysregulated, they can't keep a handle on things, so on and so forth. My sense of this is that oftentimes that's a really scary, almost shaming kind of an experience for someone to go through because they feel like they're failing in some way, I'm the only one, or I can't handle it, or whatever.
Yeah, because by the time you realize it, when that day comes that you realize it, you also realize that you've been going through this for years. Me. And so holy smokes. And then you sort of have this, this back vision, right? They say, looking back, you see everything clearly, that once it becomes clear to you that there's a problem, then you realize that it's been a problem for a long time. Then you realize how many people you've hurt in that period of time because you didn't realize you were sick. And then you get this enormous guilt and enormous embarrassment of, like, how did I not see this? How did I not realize that I was falling apart now, right? Yeah.
Well, totally, right? And I mean, I always say, like, whether I'm training other clinicians or, you know, talking to my own clients, like, I've never met anybody who meets criteria for PTSD who's feeling really good about themselves, who's feeling really competent, right? Like, it just doesn't
lose all your confidence.
Yeah. So I mean, that's also part of why, like, I just really wanted to insist on BOSS being, like, again, a sort of a mental health intervention where it's being facilitated by mental health people, because, like, Tim Black has this great way of looking at shame, which is, you know, one of the ways we repair shame is to let other people see our intrinsic humanity, right? And, you know, you can't do that in a classroom, right? So one of the things we're trying to do, like in BOSS or in TRP or COPE or whatever, is, like, just drop some of that armor so people can actually, you know, talk about, like, it's almost like, you know, let the underbelly be seen a little bit, because frankly, that's where the healing happens, right? It doesn't happen behind the layers of defense. It happens when we're able to really let other people see us for all of our, you know, our flaws or whatever. And the amazing thing that happens, Sean, in group is, like, and maybe you know this from your own experiences, but, like, the number of times I've seen people, like, just, like, you can visibly see the relief of, like, I'm not alone with this. Like, it's not actually a defect about me. Like, this is, cause I respect that person over there. And if they have this too, maybe there's something about myself that I've been looking at in an incorrect kind of a way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that's dead on. It's, now, I guess it's already assumed, but I should go back and clarify this. So the BOSS program is also through Wounded Warriors, right? They're on board with this?
They are. So Wounded Warriors has just been amazing, and they've made a commitment to us for the financial backing for BOSS. And so, you know, if somebody is interested in coming to BOSS, there's a $175 administrative fee, which is just, frankly, to cover what it takes to kind of keep a website going and things like that. Right. But then all the other expenses covered by Wounded Warriors. And I'd be very happy to share that, like, one of the things that has come up again recently and since we launched is people going, well, you know, I don't know if I can do that because what if I'm on shift and whatever. So the Calgary Fire Department actually just indicated this week that they're going to let their firefighters come to BOSS even if they're on shift. So as long as they're not accruing overtime. Yeah. So, you know, so that's pretty cool. Like that, you know, because what I'm also hearing is, yeah, it's huge, right? Like, departments are also starting to go, okay, like, you know, what other kinds of things do we need to do? Right. So, so we're hoping to kind of figure that piece out too, is how do we actually help people get the time so they can come and do this thing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I commend, like, Calgary Fire has been doing some pretty incredible things with their mental health strategies, and as evidenced by that, it's quite amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. I hope that, you know, I would challenge all other organizations like that to really take some responsibility like that and to really find programs such as this one to help their members. I mean, they have to.
Well, and you know, like we just had some data published on R2MR last month actually, and you know, R2MR has just done such a tremendous job in kind of doing what you're doing, right? Like getting the conversation going, reducing stigma. Like that's the most significant effect that R2MR was reported to have had, and I think departments have done an incredible job of supporting people to do that, right? And my hope with BOSS, and this is why we feel really fortunate that CIPSRT has come along to actually independently evaluate this thing, is, you know, I suspect in 6 months, I mean, certainly in a year's time, we're going to have data to tell us what we're doing with BOSS. Is it working? Like, is it being reported as being effective? Are people, you know, are there things we can measure that actually show that maybe this program's having a little bit of an effect, right? And my feeling on this is, if in a year's time that data says, no, it's not, but, you know, here's what we've learned, fantastic, right? Like, that just moves the yards down the field, right? And hopefully it will be showing that this is somehow having an impact, and then we can kind of keep going with that. But that's the hope, right? Because then we get into a place in a year's time or 2 years' time where, you know, if we have strong data to say that this kind of an intervention is working, I mean, we have a real strong argument to be making for, you know, funding and looking at some things departmentally across the country differently.
Yeah, that's wicked.
I mean, that's my hope. That's what.
There's no doubt in my mind that that's what it's going to turn into. That's what's going to happen.
Well, I hope so. You know, like, I mean, you know this. Like, we've just the public health epidemic of suicide in first responders is just it's it's a real thing, right? And, I certainly know that I have my own experience and reactions when, maybe somebody that I'm working with or somebody that I know, through other channels, complete suicide. Like I just, this is just a problem that we can't take our eyes off of. And I love the spirit that there seems to be out there about sort of collectively trying to find ways to keep addressing this, right? Keep it in the forefront, keep trying to be creative. It's kind of an exciting time, even though it's coming off the heels of some pretty painful things, right?
Yeah, for sure it is. This is amazing. So I really look forward to hearing more about this program and to sort of keeping in touch with it and seeing it grow. It seems like it's going to be amazing. Could really make a dent in this epidemic just by pre-educating people,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just really feel like, when we've got 10 people in a room who are talking about similar types of experiences relative to the work that they do, and they're experiencing similar kinds of impacts. I mean, of course, there's an individual difference, but by and large, there's some similarities. It takes it out of this idea that this is personal failing. This is character defect or something. And it puts it more into the context of the work, right? And again, I just feel like that helps people maybe feel less isolated, feel less ashamed, like as if, they have fatally, failed in some kind of way. And it puts it into where it should be, which is this context of this high risk work that you do. It has these expected sort of outcomes, but here's some things we can do to try to help you stay healthy with this, right? Like that's the conversation I want to be having.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's wicked. Thank you for that. Now, I want you to put on your rant hat with me now, Megan.
Which one? I have no idea.
So basically, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant. I'm going to talk about some things that I wanted to have you on to talk about.
Okay.
And then I want to hear your perspective. Feel free to blow me out of the water. Feel free to change my mind because one thing about me, I have positions, I have opinions, but I only have them until someone changes my mind. So I try to stay open. So I want to talk about a couple things. And I want to preface it first by saying that, these are my opinions, and I don't discount anything that someone who is suffering needs to do or needs to tell themselves in order to get better. I want to say that right away. But I do believe that if you are someone who has put themselves out as an advocate publicly, whether it be on social media, or otherwise, and you are putting out information and trying to help people that way, I think that there are some responsibilities that we need to take. So here's my first one. So this is really prevalent now. I've heard it in a lot of places. So people are dropping the D off PTSD. So they're dropping the whole disorder thing. And here's my issue with it. And then I want to hear what you guys think. From what I know, from my sort of layperson sort of take on it is this. Post-traumatic stress, PTS, is something that every human goes through because everybody goes through traumatic events because it's all relative to them. So we all have post-traumatic stress. Your brain deals with that usually, most times. It processes that. There is there's a process in place to allow your brain to process those traumatic memories, make it back into narrative memory so that it doesn't bother you anymore. So when that process fails, when that process breaks, then after a certain period of time, whether it be, up to, I think it's 30 days, somewhere around there, some differing time frames, if those symptoms linger and this event still bothers you and you still have these certain symptoms, then it becomes post-traumatic stress disorder. Because it is a disorder. Your brain is in a position of disorder because the normal process it uses to process these memories has not worked. Okay, that's how I sort of get it. So to me, disorder works. Now I hear people saying, well, disorder is a negative word. It has too much stigma behind it. So then they're just dropping the D, which doesn't make sense because PTS is already a clinical thing. You can't just call it the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And good. I'll get back my train of thought and say, but what do you think about that so far?
Well, so I completely agree with you, right? That I mean, we all experience exposure to stress, right? And I mean, actually, there was a seminal study that came out about 20 years ago that actually looked at most of us, so civilian populations, whatever, most of us are going to go through what we would call a criterion A traumatic stressor at some point in our lives, right? So all of us are going to go through some kind of an event that could lead to this condition we're calling post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So it's not exposure to trauma, actually, that is the thing, because to your point, we have a whole system in our brain and our nervous system that is devoted to processing stress and working this through. And so you're absolutely right. When that process breaks down, that's when we end up in the disorder, and that's when we get this thing called PTSD. So pathologizing adverse events is a real problem in my opinion. So I'm completely with you on that, right?
Yeah.
The thing, I go back I don't actually go back and forth. I have come to really refer to PTSD really as an injury. And I have done that over the last number of years on the increasing strength of the neuroscience, actually, research that we have behind our understanding, right? So you look at the brain and what's happening, we're not talking about after one exposure to stressor or a traumatic event. We're talking about what happens on a chronic basis when a brain is just overtaxed by stress and trauma. And this breakdown, it really is, frankly, I sort of think about it sometimes as like an overuse injury, right? So if you're only working out your bicep or you're doing, certain type of typing, you're going to end up with a particular type of injury. You're going to end up with carpal tunnel or something like that. So I don't mind the idea of PTSD being considered an injury because we are seeing circuitry and pathways and structures within the brain being impaired in connection with this thing.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I'm going to come back to that because you just made a good point I want to come back to. So my thoughts on this whole disorder thing is that by dropping the disorder, we're actually lending to the stigma. We're saying, you know what, you're right. That's a bad word. We shouldn't use it, which is really disheartening to the millions of other people who have various disorders, who are disorders. So we're like abandoning them, saying, yeah, we don't really want to be part of that group. I see it like that, and the only way to get rid of the stigma is not by getting rid of the word. It's by using it. It's by making it part of normal conversation. Like I say, for me, I embrace it.
Okay.
And here's why. I earned this. It wasn't the prize at the end of my career that I thought I was going to get, but I earned my PTSD. I did. It's mine. I own it. And I've had to think that way. It's what has gotten me to get over some of that moral injury of getting it in the first place. And I know everybody has to have their own thing, but I just don't think that getting rid of a word helps get rid of the stigma in this case. But I did hear, and just for what you said, I was recently at a resiliency conference here in Edmonton put on by Daniel Sundahl.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was there, and there was a speaker that talked about occupational stress injury. If I was going to start to call this something else, that makes sense to me.
Well, operational stress injury, right? So operational stress. So that's what an OSI is, right? So actually the federal government came out with that term, 15 years ago to capture service-related injuries that people wouldn't have sustained if they hadn't been in the context of their work life, right? So that's where operational stress injury came from, and PTSD is one of those operational stress injuries.
Okay, so it's sort of a banner, sort of.
Yeah, so it's a category, right? That's right, it's a category. So underneath that category would fall PTSD, could fall substance abuse problems, could fall depression even, right? Like those all could be operational stress injuries. Gotcha. It's just we've equated OSI and PTSD, which is we need to separate those two things. But I mean, that's part of where the injury conversation comes from, right? And I don't know, Sean, like I just sort of feel like, okay, we know that everybody out there is probably going to go through a trauma at some point in their life, but not everybody's going to go on to develop PTSD.
No, that's right.
The fact that our first responders do and our military does, right? Like, again, I feel like we don't do a service to understanding this thing if we take this out of the context in which it happens, right? Because people hear disorder and unfortunately that is the stigma. It's like there's something wrong with me, right? And what I really, I know this about PTSD. If you look at the DSM, right, our Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, right? Right. PTSD is the only condition in there that you have to have exposure to an external event in order for it to develop. So people don't ever develop endogenous PTSD, like it doesn't just spontaneously come on sometimes, like other mental health conditions can do, right? So again, I feel like we need to put, operational stress injury into its own sort of context where we look at the external factors that really come to bear on this thing.
Right. No,
You know, what I think you've done, what I just heard you say, and I think it's beautiful. Like what I hear you say is a real comment on post-traumatic growth. Like you've made meaning out of the fact that you developed PTSD. Like I earned it, right? I got this. What's that? Yeah.
It's mine. I earned this by many years of, even though I wasn't taking my care of myself as good as I should have been, by many years of dealing with everybody's worst day and trying to help them through everybody's worst day. This is what I earned.
Yeah. I mean, you've got the evidence that you turned up, right? Like, yeah. And I think that's probably a really profound piece of meaning that you've taken out of this thing, right? So, you know, I just know that like the folks that I work with, when we talk about what's happening in the brain and we talk about, again, what happens to the hippocampus and the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex and blah, blah, blah. And people actually hear that. They're like, oh, like this isn't me. Right. They see it as, and kind of like, you know, if you explain the pathophysiology of infection or injury to a certain part of the body or what happens in the liver or whatever, right? People can kind of get on board with that. And I just see that as decreasing shame, right? So again, if I certainly see shame as a really big part of operational stress injury and PTSD, right? So things that help decrease shame to me, I'm going to line up with all day long.
Yeah, and I mean, clinically, from a clinical standpoint, here's why I think this is important. This whole PTS versus PTSD thing. By putting it out there, by starting to call it PTS instead of PTSD, I think two things happen. First of all, it creates confusion with the public, with the general public.
Sure.
Because we're calling it something different, even though and what we're calling it already has its own thing. Like that already is a thing. So it creates confusion that way, and it also undermines our clinicians, our doctors that we count on that have to use that clinical definition in order to get my diagnosis. Like it just, if you know what I mean, it just creates a lot of uncertainty or a lot of confusion with it. It kind of undermines the whole thing.
Well, and you know, frankly, we're not like there certainly is, and this is actually kind of a federal push. So, you know, PTS, post-traumatic stress, is an experience that people can have that can potentially lead to PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, or operational stress injury.
I don't mind that either, by the way. I don't mind putting an I on the end. That makes sense to me.
Do you know who we have to thank for that?
Who's that?
George Bush.
Seriously?
I mean, I don't think we're thanking him, but yeah, he put that in a speech a number of years ago.
That makes sense to me because again, it's another level after PTS, because PTS is just a normal thing that everybody goes through.
Absolutely, and let's not. That's my thing. Like, we're not going to pathologize normal human experience. Like, unfortunately, this is what life has to offer any of us. But post-traumatic stress leading to potential, you know, post-traumatic stress injury, operational stress injury, one of which is PTSD. Like, that's how I talk about this. And then really, I just want people to get on board with, you know, talking about and relating about this thing differently, right? And taking it out of, I somehow failed and fucked up here. Sorry, pardon my language, but you know, like,
I feel free. Like,
okay.
Like I can tell you, like in grade 8, when I got dumped by my girlfriend, there was some post-traumatic stress there. I can tell you that right now. That's a traumatic event for a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
That everybody goes through.
Yeah.
But it doesn't linger for usually more than 30 days. It doesn't become PTSD.
Yeah.
But all these everyday things are experiences that everybody goes through.
Oh my God. And yes, Sean, I mean, you want one of my rants? You want one of my soapboxes? I mean, that's just it. Like, we've just gotten so afraid of experiencing pain or difficulty or disappointment. It's just like, come on. Like, do we see what is happening to us as a species? Like, we can't. I saw this great podcast the other day by somebody named Simon Sulak or something like that. And he was talking about like why there's these high rates of, you know, depression and suicide in adolescents these days. And frankly, it's like we don't have any capacity to tolerate adverse experience. And
not at all.
Like, it's crazy, right? You
know, these like just participation medals, like, come on.
Yeah,
no. There are going to be, you're right. We're not preparing. We're not preparing our young ones well.
No, and
step out into life.
And this way of just like talking sort of casually and informally, like, oh, you know, I went through this and this, now I've got PTSD. It's like, no, you don't. Like, you really, really don't. And you don't want it. Like, you know, this is a serious injury. Like, I like the ability to talk about it as an injury, but let's be frank. Like, this is a serious injury that has significant effect on people's lives, and it has a whole bunch of things that like go along with it, including risk of suicide and relationship breakdown and substance. Like, it's a big deal, right? So let's hold on to the sensitivity of what we're talking about when we're talking about this injury, and not sort of equate it to, I'm sorry about your breakup in grade 8, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like I think that'll come, because I think that happens to everything. Like when asthma was big, everybody had asthma. When autism or ADHD, like everybody has it. Like, and not everybody does.
No.
But that's sort of the process that we have to get through and come out on the other side to realize, you know what I mean? It seems to be the total process that society takes with everything.
That's right.
When something starts to be talked about a lot in media, all of a sudden you will get the people that, oh, I have it too, and they don't. But that's just, that's the way it works. Like, because what I hear with this is, and I think this is, a little bit incorrect, is that PTSD is the normal reaction of the brain to trauma. No, it's not.
No,
PTS is the process that's normal. PTSD is what happens when that process fails.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it.
But that's okay. People are so afraid to not be normal, or to they need to not be broken, or they need to not be sick, or they're so scared of that. And I can understand that, by the way. I'm not trying to belittle anybody, because I've definitely have those feelings, and I understand where they come from.
Yeah.
I totally get it. However, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be healthy. It's okay to not, it's okay to be in that place, as long as you can grow from that place. It's okay to be broken. It's okay to have an illness. It's okay to have a disorder. Like, it's okay.
Well, totally, frankly. And I mean, to me, in my head, this is where we circle back to where Boss came from, right? Because, we spend a whole bunch of time in Boss talking about emotions and like, what's the nature and purpose of the emotions that you have? Because they're there for a reason. And this pathologizing of normal emotion it just drives me nuts. Like, we've done such a poor job, I feel, in our society of just being like, this is okay and this isn't. So, if you feel sad or scared or disappointed or whatever, get away from that as soon as you possibly can. Like that's a problem, right?
That's a problem. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's a conversation that I think is very relevant in first response culture. But I mean, that's just a whole thing in society for me. It's like, come on, let's get back to just being a species that can have a range of experience other than just this sort of like robotic happy one.
Yeah, totally.
There you go. That was my soapbox.
Well done. Yeah. Thanks. I mean, it makes me so frustrated. Yeah. Even though I understand all the emotions that are involved with it.
Well, it makes me frustrated because honestly, I mean, I see 6-7 people a day, and like, the number of times in a week that somebody just comes into me and they're just like shattered because they see this, what I see is a very natural experience. They see it as something that is so wrong about them, right? Like, I was talking to somebody earlier this week, we were doing some trauma work, and he said to me, he's like, well, we were working on a death that he had been present to, and he's like, but the thing is that I still feel sad. And I was like, of course you do, and that's okay.
Yeah,
like,
of course you do.
Yeah.
If you didn't still, I mean, there might be a bigger problem if you still didn't feel sad.
That's right.
Yeah,
and like, in trauma work, we're trying to work on disturbance. We're trying to facilitate processing and digestion of this stuff. We're not trying to get rid of natural emotion. And why would we ever want to?
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And I mean, and what goes with this too, especially when you get in a group setting, or because of social media, because now we're just a small community of billions of people that can just reach out to everybody. What I find is it's also important to keep hammering home that trauma is relative. So when someone talks about their trauma, that's not the time for you to say, oh, I got one better than that. That's not how this works. Like, there's no trauma Olympics. There's no gold medal for your trauma.
That's right.
It's all relative. And I find people get caught up in that. Oh, well, you can't have PTSD because you didn't go through what I did to get it.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how it works.
No. And I completely agree with you. And I've had that conversation this week actually too about like, well, I just don't feel like I deserve it. And it's like, well, hey, let's just drop, what do we need to do to drop that? Right? Because you're absolutely right. And I mean, the number of factors that play together that render one person vulnerable to a particular incident or experience and someone not. I mean, it's a complicated dance, right? But, if we can get out of this sort of like, the relativity Olympics, like maybe then we can just sort of be with what we have, right? And if we can be with what we have, then maybe we can facilitate processing and working these things through, differently and hopefully better, right?
Yeah, I find it's a waste of energy. We're wasting energy on comparing trauma and wasting energy on trying to figure out what letter to drop or keep when that it's there. That's the clinical term. It's there. Let's not waste energy on it. Let's instead put energy into this. Let's put energy into talking about it. Let's put energy into educating.
Yeah.
Like, I just feel like we're just wasting a lot of energy spinning our wheels about these things that don't matter. You know what I mean? In the big scheme of things, they don't.
Yeah.
Right?
No, totally. And that's actually, and I want to just give a little shout out to Scott and Phil with Wounded Warriors in that sense, because one of the things that I've really appreciated about them is like they've just entered into this space and said, we're just going to go ahead and do this, even though we don't have, like they're a charity funding programs for first responders and military, you know what I mean? Like, even though we don't have the funding, we're going to do it. We're going to figure out a way. And like, I think that's pretty cool because I think that's in line with what we're talking about, right? It's like, let's just start doing this. Let's stop wasting our energy on trying to convince each other and let's just get to doing some things. And maybe through the doing, we'll experience the change, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Good. That was good. That was good. That was awesome. The, Megan, if people want to reach out to you in any way to learn about these many programs, or I know you also have a private practice as well, right?
Yeah, so we have a few WGM psychologies. So we have our home clinic in Calgary, and then we've recently opened a practice in Red Deer. We have a small practice in Edmonton, and we have a larger practice in Toronto that opened in the spring. So our BOSS programs are run out of all those offices, and we are in the process of actually looking at opening one in Saskatchewan here in the next few weeks or months. So, and the folks in the practice are all people like me, right? Like people who are sort of compelled by this issue, and we're all sort of equally trained in terms of treating PTSD, and everybody's going to be working to deliver BOSS. So, that's our hope, is that we can, sort of spread this thing across the country so it's not localized just to Western Canada.
Right.
So if people wanted to get in touch with me, if you want to get information on us and our programs, probably the easiest way is our website. So that's www.wgmpsych, so psych.com. I'm very happy for people to contact me directly if they want. It's just I have a mouthful of letters. So Megan is MEGAN .McElheran is MCELHERAN, and then again that's at WGMpsych.com.
Right.
And then we have bosshelps.com. So if people are particularly interested in BOSS, they can go to that website.
Wicked. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. So, before we end off, people are probably getting tired of hearing this, but I'm going to ask you the same question that I ask everybody else. So, if there's anybody listening that may be struggling in any way whatsoever, at any level, and they were in front of you, what would you say to them?
That's a big question. Thank you. I mean, I think what I would say is, right now, what's going on in your mind may not be something that you can perfectly count on to be telling you the truth. And so, before you do anything that might be drastic or permanent, reach out, because I can tell you, at least for me, there's not a lot that I haven't heard at this juncture. Do you know what I mean? So that idea of like, you really are not alone, and you are not the first person who has gone through this. You are not the first person whose mind has become sort of an enemy stomping ground. And so you're not alone. We're in this together. Reach out.
Perfect. You brought up a good point, and so I'm going to add to it.
Sure.
What I've learned to realize is this, through talking to awesome guests like yourself and just being able to reach out to awesome people, I've come to realize we talk about this injury. So if you break your arm, I've said this before, people are probably getting tired of hearing this, but I'm going to say it again. So if you break your arm, Megan, I don't expect you, nor do you expect yourself, to be able to throw a ball with that arm.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You don't, or to be able to hold your weight or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't expect that of it. When we don't. There's a cast on it for 6 to 8 weeks. You don't expect it. So why are we taking the information from an injured brain as truth?
Exactly.
Why? Like when I get out, so that's why I tell myself, when I get these, because I still battle with this, so I get negative information from my brain, you can't do this. Why are you doing this? Like you know, all these negative things that lead to depression or whatever.
Yeah.
When I start to get those thoughts, it's like I stop myself and say, hey, you can stop that right now because you're just not well. Like you're injured. So I'm not going to listen to what you say when you get like this, because this is just your injured part speaking.
Yeah.
And it's not the truth. And that seems to help me. Like, it helps me a lot just by telling my own brain to shut up.
Yeah. Well, but also taking it, like, that's exactly it. It's like, take it out of you. Like, okay, so there's certain things that are contributing to this right now, and I've got to learn to, like, be a better consumer of what my mind has to give me.
Right.
And realize that, you know, I'm going to be vulnerable to certain types of messages depending on if I've slept, if I've eaten, how much I've had to do in a day, if I've just had a fight with somebody. Like, my mind's going to give me different things, and let's learn to like look after our minds, and I mean sort of keep track of what's going on in there differently, right? Because our minds, unfortunately, they're influenced by lots of different things. And so sometimes we can kind of count on what they're telling us, but lots of times we can't. And we got to learn to not take our minds so seriously.
Yeah. Like, learn to question your own brain.
Yes.
It's okay to backtalk your brain.
It totally is. Like, it's good to take those thoughts out of you, you know, put them in front of you. And what would you do to them if this was like an enemy talking to you in this way? You know, you punch him in the nose or something, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we take everything our brain tells us as the word, as the gospel.
Yeah. Well, and I really feel like folks who do the kind of work that you do, you're like especially vulnerable to this because you're supposed to know. You know what I mean? Like, when all else has failed, you guys turn up. So you're the ones who are supposed to know, right? And so when all of a sudden, you know, it's like your mind's telling you something and you're the one who's supposed to know and it's telling you some pretty awful stuff. It's really like, it's even harder to kind of fight back against that, but that's exactly what you need to do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Megan, this has been wicked. This has been awesome. I think that I feel like this is the only start of our podcast relationship.
Well, I sure hope so, Sean. This was great. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love this.
I'm always looking for a good rant partner, so I think this is going to be good. So,
what should we talk about next?
I know we'll have to save them up, but
we'll have to talk about Christmas next time because man.
Yeah, I know. But listen, Megan, you're awesome. Thank you for the work that you do and that you continue to do. We need you to keep doing it. There's lots more work to do, and we need you to do it to help out. And so I just thank you, and thank you for taking the time to come on.
Well, my pleasure to come on, and really, it's like I really, really believe this idea of we are in this together, we're doing this together. So, I mean, my thanks back to you. My thanks to anybody who puts on a uniform in the service of keeping this country safe and healthy. Like, I mean, it's not anything I'm doing. So, I mean, it truly is my privilege to be able to help in whatever sort of small way I can, right?
Oh, you're a very important part. You are an invaluable part to this whole process. So, and I know that very well, and I'm sure my listeners do as well. But you're right, hashtag in this together. That's why I put that on all my posts. It's a tribute to Wounded Warriors. That's their hashtag. Yeah. And I believe in it as well. So thank you, Megan. Continue to do your work. Take care of yourself and your family and your loved ones until we speak again. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Sean. You too. Take care of yourself. I will. Thanks. Okay, bye, everyone.
Now my shift is finally over. I gotta deal with what's mine.
And there you have it. Another season of UpTalk podcast is done. Huge thank you to Dr. Megan McElheran for coming on the podcast. I have a feeling that she'll be coming on again. We have lots of stuff we can talk about. Let me know what you thought of this episode. Please leave me a comment, leave me some feedback, let me know. Shine a bat signal, whatever you need to do, because I need to hear from you. I don't hear from enough of you. To be fair, to be plain, I don't. And I want to hear from more of you. So please let me know what's going on. Another special thank you to all 24 guests this season. And actually, sorry, it's my mistake. Started off as 24, it actually ends up being 23 because of some changes in episodes I had to make. So thank you to the 23 guests that I had on this season. You were all awesome. I am better for knowing you and for talking to you. So big thank you. Thank you to Project Trauma Support for coming on board as a sponsor. Check them out, projecttraumasupport.com. That leads me to this. We are looking for sponsors for the podcast. So if you are an organization or an individual, which would be kind of weird, but we can still do it. I'm still up for it. That would like to sponsor the podcast, you can do that. We are looking for you. Okay, so reach out to me. I'll get you pointed in the right direction to get that done. And you can be a sponsor of the podcast, have a little commercial, maybe come on the podcast to talk about what you're doing. And you get to be out there on the Mental Health News Radio Network along with the podcast. Okay? So please, if you're interested, let me know. That would be awesome. Also, at the beginning of the podcast, I mentioned this is a hard time of year for people, which is totally true. So I want to shine a light on a new organization. Boots on the ground, peer support, 24/7 peer support line. This is the number. Right now, this is for Ontario. I know that in the future, they are looking to expand that reach, but in Ontario, if you are in Ontario and you're having some issues or would like some resources on how to get some better education and help regarding mental health, call this number, 1-833-677-2668. All right? Big thanks for them for starting this up. I'm sure I'll have them on the podcast next season. That's my plan, so we'll make it happen, and we'll learn more about this program, which will be awesome. The new season, I'm going to take a little break, and the new season will start January 30th, appropriately on Bell Let's Talk Day. That's going to be the first episode. Already have it recorded. It's going to be wicked. All I'm going to say is that we're finally going to hear from somebody from the corrections field, and it's a very emotional, hard-hitting episode. So I look forward to putting that out. I think you're going to really get a lot out of it. And that's all I'll say about that for now. And I just want to end the year by just acknowledging some people. And listen, I'm going to forget people. So please don't take offense if I don't mention you. It's not because you're not important. It's just because my brain can only remember so many things at once. Okay? So here's some things you should Google while I'm on break. Some people, some organizations. All right? Look up Callie's Corner by Callie Power. Look up Navigate Change by my brother Peter Tripp. Cracked Armor, created by Mark Long. Okay, look up Natalie Harris. Teresa Coulter. Also, this is a big one, guys. Sorry I haven't mentioned this until right now, but look up the Tema Foundation. That's right. From the ashes of the Tema Contra Memorial Trust, the Tema Foundation has risen up and is now up and going. Look them up on social media. Founded by the Contra family with a renewed effort, a renewed sense of direction in creating partnerships and supporting one another, and as always, supporting all branches of first responders who may be struggling and their families. The Tema Foundation, check them out. We're going to be hearing lots of stuff about them in the new year, and I plan on having somebody from the Tema Foundation on the podcast. I only assume that I'll probably be doing some work with them. I hope to. And we'll find out what they're all about and what's going to happen. Okay, so check them out. Check out Bunker Gear, PTSD Bunker Gear for your brain, PTSD, the truth behind the smile, Rescue the Rescuers Show, another good podcast. Check out the Mental Health News Radio Network. I've Got Your Back 911, of course. There's just so many. There's just a lot. You know, Nick Halmacy, I could go on and on. There's just so many people. Okay, so there's no shortage of resources. Feel free to message me if you're looking to get pointed in a direction for some resources. I'll find them. Landing Strong in Windsor, Nova Scotia by Dr. Belinda Seagram, a new treatment facility. Check that out. Okay, that's enough for now. So guys, I hope that you have an awesome holiday season. Now, if you celebrate a holiday this season, whatever holiday that is, I hope it's awesome. If you don't celebrate a holiday, I hope you have an awesome end of the year. However you choose to celebrate or not celebrate, I hope it's awesome. Okay, I hope you have lots of love and support around you. If you don't, reach out. Okay, and until the end of January, when we come back for season 4 of UpTalk, please take care of yourself and each other. More love, less judgment.
'Cause we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference and the first on every scene. And it's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this hurting when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on. When those sirens are gone, it keeps going on. When those sirens are gone.